All right, well, it is 11 o'clock, so I feel like we should just jump in. As people arrive, they will pick up with us. I am so grateful to be here as part of the Music Dimension Research Network, getting to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is centering belonging through music when working with older adults. My name is Melita Belgrave. I am a music therapist. I work at Arizona State University. I'm an associate professor of music therapy and also associate dean for culture and access within the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts. And let's go ahead and get started. So I do like to do a grounding and welcome practice whenever I enter into space with everyone, because usually we're running about our days doing 50 million things. And the arrival into a space as well as the exiting out of a space really sets us up for what we're getting ready to do. So I would love it wherever you are, if you can make sure that you have something to take notes with, or something. And it could be your phone, it could be handwritten. I love to handwrite things. And then once you make sure you have those materials, just go ahead and get comfortable where you are. Make sure your feet are touching the ground. You're sitting comfortably in your chair or couch or standing if that's what you're doing. And I would love for us just to take 3 centering, grounding breaths together before we start into the work. So getting where you are, taking a nice deep breath in and exhaling at your own pace. Doing another one in. Continuing to exhale at your own pace. And then your third one in. And maybe even doing a little movement of shaking it out or a stretch as you exhale. And I hope that that brings you just a little bit of grounding as we go into this topic. So, one of the first things that I always like to talk about is, what did I normally do in music therapy, especially when I wasn't thinking about centering is my main goal, right? So traditionally, when we're building music interventions, and that's for any music practitioner, it doesn't have to just be for a music therapist. It could be for a sound practitioner, a music educator, a music neuroscientist, anyone who is using music in health, especially with older adults. A lot of our decisions are based on the elements of music because we're trying to influence a behavior or influence an emotion. And I have several elements of music over on the side of my screen here that I usually think about, right? I think about whether it's going to be a passive intervention that I want someone to do with me. I want them to listen, I want them to reflect. Or if it's an active experience, I want them to be engaged in the music making with me or moving to music. I think about whether I'm using live music, whether I've got my guitar, my piano, my percussion instruments, my voice, or whether I'm using recorded music, right? I think about this idea about preferred music, whether it's something that the person really loves versus what happens when I bring in new or novel music, right? What happens when I do the original song that everyone knows that you could sing along with in your sleep versus a cover? My favorite story related to this is, there is a version of Here Comes the Sun, right? We probably all thought of something very specific when I said that song. But there is a version that is done with Yo-Yo Ma and James Taylor that is absolutely beautiful. And I use that song in a lot of my movement activities with older adults because the structure is a lot more fluid and flexible than the original recording. And they really get into the intervention that we're able to do with that music because of the way the cover is done. I also think about tempo, which you kind of heard me reflect on with that cover. I think about genre, the type of music I'm using. Some people even think about the key, and I definitely think about the key when I'm thinking about if it's an active music intervention and I want the older adults to sing along with me. I also think about the instrumentation and texture, right? A solo accompaniment instrument versus something that is rich with brass and strings and lots of harmonies, right? And even the meter, right? Trying to do an intervention in 7 is a little different than doing one in 4 or 3 or 6/8. So when I think about those things, that's, so much of my career was built on that. But as I think about, I want to build music interventions for older adults that promote belonging, right? It's switching that and thinking about the theories that support belonging and identity. So I'm going to introduce you to three that I like to use in my work. The first is Design for Belonging. This is an amazing book that I think everyone should own. It's by Susie Wise and individuals from the Stanford D School. The Social Identity Wheel from University of Michigan, which is available online as a free resource, and The Social Change Ecosystem by Deepa Iyer, an amazing way to think about identities and how we help people belong in spaces. So I've got a small reflection point that I want you to think about during this whole webinar that we're together in space. I want you to reflect on how, as I introduce these various tools, right, and we think about these ways that people connect to their identities, I want you to think about how this affects the way older adults shows up in various communities, right, and where we might be meeting them as a music practitioner. So what happens when an older adult is in their family unit? Right? Because when they're in their family unit, they have all sorts of roles. They might have grandparents, they might have parents, they may have spouse, they may have aunt or uncle. Like there's so many things, right? And those relationships are built on a lot of history. Think about friendship circles, which are often called the families we choose, and how our roles and our identities are different in that, right? When someone is in their home or in their neighborhood, when they are in local community spaces like a day center or a senior center, and then facilities that they may visit during the day, like I mentioned before, or where they may dwell, like an independent living place, a 55 and up community, an assisted living, a nursing home, and how all of those identities about who they are might influence their musical background, their taste, and their preference. So thinking through about what kind of music am I going to bring in based on who these individuals are or may not be, right? So my career, I just wanted to give a brief overview of how I ended up even thinking about these things or noticing these things, right? And it started in 2002 when I became a lifestyle director at an independent living facility with a small assisted living facility wing. And I had to go beyond my music therapy skills. My music therapy skills were great. We had music and movement programs, we had a choir, we had performances. But what else am I needing to do? Right. And it's the first time that I really learned that I had to understand and celebrate the whole person, their whole life. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm looking at a thing in the question. Yes, I am a music therapist. I'm board certified and I teach music therapy at Arizona State University. Thank you. And thinking about all these ways in which I'm understanding the whole person and what matters to them, right? How their families matter to them, how their lives that they've lived that has been so rich matters to them, right? And some of my music therapy work, working with older adults with late stage dementia and realizing that someone is still in there and we can capture and connect with that person through music interventions and through other forms of nonverbal communication like touch. Running intergenerational rock bands when we're bringing two generations together and focusing on music of today. So getting older adults to connect to current events and local culture that is all around them. Intergenerational preschool program that you'll hear me talk a little bit about, where we worked on academic skills for the younger adults. And I had older adults serving as my teachers and using music interventions to teach academic skills. Intergenerational music school programs, where, I'm taking fourth and fifth graders and getting older adults to connect through music because the goal is for them to recognize that they are similar, right? That even though age is different, you have similar things in common. Intergenerational iPad band, it's just as it sounds, coming together and forming a rock band, but using iPads to do it. And then probably one of my most impactful projects is the Heartbeat Project, which many music therapists do. And that's where you're capturing heartbeats of patients and then using that heartbeat as the foundation for a bereavement legacy gift for the family, where you take their song that they've chosen and add in piano or vocals or guitar and other accompaniment, and the heartbeat becomes the drum beat. So we're going to jump in to one of my first theories that I want to talk about. And there's a prompt for you in here. So I definitely want you to think about doing something in your notes or dropping it in a question and answer will be just fine. And this is from my Design for Belonging book. And this idea that belonging versus othering, those are the two sides of the coin that we're thinking about. And both are feelings, right? I want you to think about a time when you feel like you belong. How do you notice belonging? How do you notice that a space makes you feel like you belong? Versus a space that makes you feel like, you know what, I don't necessarily belong here. These are not my people. This doesn't make me feel like I want to be so active in this space. So we're going to take just a few moments and I want you to write in your notes or in the question and answer your answer to your following prompt. What does it feel like to belong? And when have you felt moments of belonging in your day? And also the other prompt, what does it feel like to be othered? And when have you felt moments of othering in your day? And we're just going to take a few moments to be together in this space and reflect. And again, I'd love it if you drop some of it in the question and answer and or just write it down in your notes. So we'll take a few moments to do that together. Yay, something in the question and answer. Thank you. I feel like I belong when I feel like someone is joyfully going out of their way on my behalf. I love that. That resonates with me. I have felt othered when I am unsure of what to do slash the next step and I don't know who to ask. I love these comments, Brianna, because you're going to see them as we go into some of these theories around belonging, that is exactly it. And I think one of the things that we sometimes forget when we're diving into these things is that like we experience it too before we put on our hats of therapist, practitioner, interventionist. We can connect to these things. Jenny, belonging is a sense of connection, a sense of being seen and understood and valued and having a purpose. That I really love. And othering, feeling judged or like you don't know the rules or social codes, feeling excluded. That again is really getting into that, like it's almost so on a guttural level that you can feel that othering, right? I really appreciate both of these comments. And again, as you are thinking of things as I'm going on, always feel comfortable in writing things in the question and answer, and I'll definitely see them at a spot when we get to more questions and things. Thank you both for sharing those. I'm going to move on to the next thing that I want us to think about. And so that was just setting the stage for belonging and othering. Now I really want to get into what does it mean that makes up a person, right? When we think of someone, what does it make them up? What are their identities that they're coming to us? And one resource and tool that I really, really love is from the University of Michigan. It's the Social Identity Wheel. And they list a lot of different identities that, make up what does someone think of when they think of themselves, right? And from this list, you can see that some are very visible to individuals, but some are not visible. You wouldn't know unless you got curious and asked a question and allowed for someone to lead with that. One of the things that always comes for me is the one about national origin. My parents, when you look at them, you would just assume they are Black, African American, probably grew up somewhere in the States. But as soon as they open their mouths, you hear a Caribbean accent and you realize they're not from here, right? My parents are from Belize, and all of my family's from Belize. And growing up in that type of household, you realize that you have different values, different music preferences, different things that you like, right? So, this idea of when we're thinking about using music to foster belonging, really understanding who are our participants in our group and how might these different things be showing up for individuals. The next one that I'm going to go on to is one that I really, really love by Deepa Iyer, and it's called the social change ecosystem. And it's this idea that it's not necessarily our identities of who we are and where we're from and what age we are and what ability levels we have, but it's really about how are we centering well-being, this idea of equity, liberation, sorry, justice and solidarity. And when I look at that inner circle, I think about how health and wellness is a real right, right? And that's the space that we want our people to be. And then we think about how all these different roles show up. And then I want us to think about how do we then interact with the participants who come into our groups, right? So I'm going to move to this next slide, which actually talks more about the characteristics of each of the roles. And I'm going to give you just a few moments to just kind of look through these different roles, even maybe think about which roles identify with you at different spaces in your life, and that these roles can change based on the setting that you're in. And then I have an example of working with an older adult who was actually multiple of these characteristics. So I'll give you a few moments to look at this, and then we'll kind of delve into it a little bit more together. So one of the things that I thought about is when I was working in when I was working in independent living facilities, right? And you know, older adults change every generation, right? This space that you just go into a facility and you just wait for life to pass you by, instead of realizing that older adults are often very thriving individuals and thinking about how can we co-create with these individuals. How do we make sure that we're not dimming their sparks because they come up with ideas that sometimes we don't come up with? And I met this gentleman who had this beautiful vision for a jazz club. He lived at a facility that had transportation that could take them anywhere they wanted to go. And he loved jazz music. And there is a jazz club in town, but it takes a while to get there. You know, as you're aging, sometimes your vision changes, especially with nighttime driving. And then that club doesn't have a parking lot. So then you're kind of stuck when you get there where you're going to park your car and you've got to walk a little ways and all that stuff. Well, this gentleman was a weaver, an experimenter, a visionary, and a builder. And he worked out an arrangement where he started doing co-booking with the local jazz club. So when they were having artists that were coming to town as part of their tour, he built a jazz club at his independent living facility where every resident paid $100. And that pocket of money was enough to contribute to the artist's touring fee. And the artist came to their independent living facility and did a concert for that group. Right? And if you were someone who were like, oh, wait, no, I'm supposed to be coming up with the interventions, I'm supposed to be providing services for you, you could easily miss that this person had done these types of things for his entire life. So, of course, he's going to do that when he continues to move into a facility. He's not going to stop that identity and role just because his living situation has changed. Seeing belonging is the next thing that I want us to move on to. And this is going to relate to some of those questions that came in, or prompts that came in the questions and answering. So when we're thinking about building moments of belonging, you're going to notice that a lot of these things that I'm talking about is before the music even starts, right? Because someone is going to feel all of this before you put on that first piece of music, before you hand them an instrument, before you invite them to sing with you, before you turn on the music, before you pick up your guitar. So the invitation is, how do we invite people to be in music with us or any experience with us? Thinking about, who does it come from? Does it require prior knowledge to understand? Especially for musicians, we live in music, right? We have lived music for so much of our lives. How many times do we invite our own selves to step back from that grounding knowledge that we know and then rethink how we bring this to someone, right? Is that invitation personal? Does it make someone feel othered? And what would it take to make it accessible to everyone? My favorite lesson was when I was working at the independent living facility. We had a newsletter, it was printed, it came out monthly, but then noticed that like everyone couldn't access that printed piece of material that was 10 to 12 point font, right? And even if they could see everything in a month, there was a need for daily accessibility, weekly accessibility. And I found myself making weekly calendars and daily calendars and putting them in the elevator, but also putting them at the front desk. And then we had older adults that had macular degeneration. So we had a phone line so they could call in and hear what was going on. We had an in-house TV for when someone doesn't want to leave their apartment first thing in the morning to find out what's happening, right? So all of those signs saying you are invited, you are included, we want your presence with us. So I want you to think about, as you're building your music interventionism, as you invite older adults to be in space with you, how does that invitation work? How does it constantly feel like your presence is wanted? And how do we notice when someone doesn't feel like it, right? So if we're running programming, we're running experiences, being very curious about who doesn't come and why, right? Entering. What do you or your environment say about belonging? What are the signs and symbols that are present for belonging? How do you set up the environment to cue belonging? And how can you use music to cue belonging and the arrival and excitement for being present? And some of the examples that I have used in my work is that when I was doing the Heartbeat Project with a local hospital, I was doing it with the Mayo Clinic. I was started using my entrances and understanding who was in the room as my moment of belonging and setting the stage for people to let me into their experience. Because most of these patients were nearing end of life. Coming in and taking your heartbeat is something that's very personal. And then I'm going to take the heartbeat and you have to trust me with it. And then you're leaving something as a legacy project for your loved ones. It is a heavy space, and it can be a heavy space. And I remember when I was first doing my project, I was like, okay, let me check the chart. What's the diagnosis? Who is this? Let me really read the referral. And I kind of stopped doing that and just walked into the room and said, can someone tell me who's all here? And I used that as a moment for them to tell me who their loved ones were, who all these people, and sometimes a pet, how all these people relate to whomever is the patient, and also just not assuming who's the patient, right? Because all of this love that's in the room is exciting. And I learned through that project, because it was part of a research project. So at the end of the project, there's a questionnaire, and they had to rate first how much did they enjoy the session. And I remember the most interesting part to me was that I was getting the same ratings for when I was doing live music in the sessions and grabbing the heartbeats and all of that, as the same when I never took my guitar out of the case. I was getting the same ratings on my sessions and their level of enjoyment and gratitude and joy when I would take the heartbeat and be involved in conversation versus when I would take out my guitar and do the heartbeat. And I realized for myself in that moment that as a music therapist, as a music practitioner, as a music interventionist, that never changes, but sometimes your tool does have to be setting the stage of belonging, right? And then our music becomes so much more impactful. During the pandemic and after that, I was doing a creative aging program with the Musical Instrument Museum, and it was for older adults with dementia. It was half museum programming and half music therapy programming. And we took older adults on an experience around the world because the museum is built up of all these galleries and instruments and music and things from countries around the world. And we had to pivot because the pandemic happened and the older adults could not come to the museum. So we went into this creative aging space where we did all of it online. But we really started using arrival music so that when someone arrives, we're not just all sitting and staring at each other in our Zoom rooms, right? There is music that's related to the session that we're going to get ready to do that says, you belong, you're in the right space. Come on, join us, right? So those moments of entering really can set the stage for the deeper work that we're getting ready to do. Participating is another one that I really love. If full participation in a music intervention is the goal, how do we invite people to participate at the level that they feel comfortable, right? Because before they arrive to you in the music intervention, they've had a whole day or a whole experience, a whole life, right? How does participation relate to all of the identities that people hold? So I've run a lot of intergenerational programs, preschoolers, middle schoolers, college students, rock band, academic, just getting together for social interaction. And I remember I did a research study once where I interviewed all of the older adults who had participated, and I got more information about why they were in those programs and why not some of the other programs. And I remember the biggest lesson that I learned in that was there was an older adult woman who worked as an educator. She loved children, but she did not birth or adopt any children. And her identity was wrapped up in something that she didn't have. But she loved interacting and giving back to children in the fourth and fifth grade, right? So, really listening to what does someone want out of life? What does someone want out of an interaction? And not missing those things and then building the interventions on that. And I remember with that woman, she was like, I don't want to be in your college age program. I'm good with that. I'm good with rock music. I really want to do this. This is where I find my meaning. And the same thing with older adults who were in my preschool program, because we were working on sight words. It was all about academic skills and some pro-social behaviors. And those older adults were the ones who found meaning in giving something back. Generativity, their quality of life was generally affected by their psychosocial well-being and how they gave back to others, right? And their music preference versus their openness to music influence their participation. So in my intergenerational rock bands, we only will ever go back to the 1960s. That is as far back in music that I will allow them, because the idea is always to learn current and newer music. And I remember there had been years when I would sometimes try and introduce things to older adults and I'd realize I'd gone too far. Like Rhapsody in Blue was too far for a group one year. And being able to say, okay, but I understand that it's going to take you a moment until this music feels comfortable to you. So me as the music therapist leading this means that we've got to do a lot of repetition, a lot of practice. I've got to show you why this music is so exciting. I've got to give you the original context of what was going on when this piece was done, right? Contributing. How do people contribute in your music experiences, right? And how does that contribution shape their belonging? Do they feel like they're belonging because they're an active part of the group? And what opportunities do people have to share their ideas and make meaningful contributions, right? And in the intergenerational rock band that I ran in Kansas City, we had it for 7 years. So I had a core group of people that we worked together for 7 years. So I get to see their musical growth and their musical love and their musical learning. And the times when I could provide vocal solos for people or duets and how they would just come alive, that there was a space where their families are traveling from out of state to see them perform, right? An opportunity to learn new instrument. I had an older adult who always wanted to learn the ukulele, and our intergenerational rock ensemble at that time was with college students. So pairing her with the college students while they're performing the song and she's learning her chords, right? Because aging is not a space where we stop learning and stop having new experiences. And music is such an intentional part of that growing and learning and giving you a hobby and giving you something to do with your day, right? Or I think about the Heartbeat Project. When I was doing it with the patients at the Mayo Clinic, if the person was alert enough, I always allowed them to pick the song for their family that they're wanting to leave behind. And I remember the day I had a patient who started picking a multitude of songs because he had a different song for every member in his family. He wanted something for his wife because it was the song that they had their first kiss to. He wanted something for his stepchildren. He wanted something for his biological children, right? And I remember this day that we were having the session, the nursing staff kept coming in to give him his medication. And he was like, I don't need that medicine right now. I am busy doing my music therapy, right? And that act of co-collaborating and contributing allowed him to not need his pain meds, right? And so music is so powerful. And when we use it with such intentionality around belonging, it can become even more powerful than what we do. I've had families contribute to the arrangement during the bereavement period. So they've picked a song and then they've listened to the heartbeat with me in the session. And then I recorded them singing the song that they were leaving to their loved one. And then after their loved one dying, saying, my mom's heartbeat was at a different tempo than the original part of the recording. You also grabbed a part of the heartbeat that had a very audible breath. I would like a track that has my mother's audible breath and her heartbeat at the tempo that it was. And then I am okay if you cut the audible breath and speed up the heartbeat to match the song that we chose. And also, please include all of the singing that we did together. Right? And then I'm able to do that. I'm just the tool that is helping this family. And then they have it in their bereavement space. That's their legacy gift that they got to build together with their loved one. Okay, we're keeping moving on the train. I'm hoping you're still with me. And we're moving along. I always laugh at webinars because I'm like, I can't see anyone. I just see the little numbers, right? Or if you put something in the question and answer. And so I miss the continual space that we have when we're in person or if we're just in a Zoom meeting. So moving into shaping belonging. And I have a couple of points in here that I want you to think about. And so space, right? What accommodations are needed to make sure that everyone has access? And when I'm thinking about aging, I'm thinking about all of the sensory needs. What vision needs are present? What's the lighting like? If you're projecting something on the screen, how big is it? Does it have a lot of colors, right? Because black and white is the easiest to see, maybe a small highlight. Not using colors that are close, like blue and yellow, blue and green. It's hard to see the difference between those. My favorite is the example of space gone wrong. When I was doing my intergenerational rock band in Kansas City, it was an aging center. It really was. And the chairs that were in that room, they had wheels. And because we did movement and all sorts of things, there was a lot of standing up and sitting down in that group. And we would laugh every week, like, why does this space have chairs with wheels? This is the not most accommodating thing, right? We don't need our older adults to be sliding around or anyone to be sliding around for that matter, right? What visual, audio, mobility, cognitive overstimulation adaptations are needed to make your space accessible and feel like your participants belong? Roles. What roles exist in your music spaces? And what other roles could exist based on someone's identity and their sense of self and what they do in other areas of their lives, right? When I was running intergenerational rock band, you're copying and pasting, you're typing errors, it doesn't get saved correctly. My former school teachers were my best editors, right? They were like, Melita, something's spelt wrong on the word thing, or, that didn't get edited in their Mac, right? My intergenerational preschool program, where we use children's tunes in music to teach academic skills, right? I had a lot of people who were also giving back in other school settings, like being a classroom volunteer or being someone in a reading program, right? So again, finding those roles that are so important to people, and then maybe finding new roles that they didn't even know they might enjoy. And events. What ways can you share what happens in your music interventions with older adults? So I thought a lot about when I was, especially in my early career as a music therapist, a lot of times we are doing our therapy sessions behind closed doors. It's not something that you think about sharing out. But once I really started leading into performance-based music therapy as a clinical theory and a foundation that I use, I really thought about how do we share, how do we invite others to experience what we're doing in our spaces, right? And so for my intergenerational rock ensemble, that group was pretty large, and we did a recital every semester near the end, and the audience was everyone. We'd invite the public. They would invite their family, their friends, their grandchildren, right? And that was such a big performance. But we had like that program was like 12 to 13 to 15 weeks, right? Versus when I did my iPad band, it was especially the first time that we did it, it was a very short group. I think it was maybe 5 to 6 weeks. We had a share up, but the audience was very different. It was not open to the whole world, right? It was open to their family that they brought with them. It was open to the staff that worked at the location. It was a smaller audience, right? So that you feel comfortable. The iPad band was also a lot smaller, right? So you're not going to feel comfortable with that big stage. And the benefits for both programs was the connection, right? The connection with their other family members by connecting through popular music, right? And the role of popular music when working with older adults. My favorite is when I would have older adults who would connect with their grandchildren because they'd be driving in the car with their multi-generational family. So it's the older adults, their adult child, and their grandchild. And something is on the radio and they're like, turn that up. That's my song. And the grandchild is like, what? That's not your song. That's my song. And you're like, no, we sing this in my choir. And they're like, whatever, rolling their eyes. And then seeing the grandchild sitting in the audience with their mouth completely open, when not only is their grandparent performing the song, there's some costumes, they're into it, they're having so much fun with it, and they're doing it just as much as music from their own era, right? So, this connection of getting to see your family members still growing and thriving. That's so important, and that music is a great way to connect. And then rituals. What experiences offer a chance to focus on communal meaning and making to promote belonging, right? So, with my intergenerational rock band, I told you I did it for 7 years, and we did one every semester. So, that was like 14 concerts at least. And we always had a wrap party. There was someone that worked at the facility who was having a cupcake business, and it was called In the Middle. And she made these most elaborate cupcakes that had something special in the middle, the flavor. And she would bring them to our concerts. But by the time we would get off the stage, those cupcakes were gone. The audience would eat them all up. So we started this thing where we would do a pizza party, and she would make us our own special batch of cupcakes, and we would watch the performance, and it'd be fun because we could see what really happened. We could hear it. They could hear that they sound well. We could hear the audience laughters, reactions, and it was this beautiful ritual to end every semester. And then I'd have them go around the group and say what was something you were grateful for the semester, what was your favorite part of the semester or the concert, and it became this thing that we did, right? So I want you to think about needs in your groups or your communities or individuals that you work with, and how can you use music to structure the ritual to address the need, right? Because rituals are great ways for us to enter. We kind of had our own centering practice today with breathing, and then the ritual of exiting, right? And some of my final thoughts that I want you to think about is, okay, so how do we take all this, right? Because I didn't do a lot of like music interventions today. Today I was really focused on a lot of the theories. So what can you do when building rapport, right? That entering space, that invitation space, and music-based interventions that foster belonging. And I have a few tips that I want you to take away with you today. Your role in your call to action is really the person that's going to be the advocate. A lot of things come up in music experiences that don't come up in other spaces when we're working with older adults. So you're getting to be the advocate, right? Being the listener. I always like to say, listen for what someone is saying, but then also listen again for what they're not saying. Because what they're not saying is usually the space where you can come in. Exploring with curiosity. I find that even on days when you're annoyed, right? Because we're humans, we're not always on, right? We're not always feeling so wonderful. How can you use those moments of resistance, moments of difficulty, moments of misunderstanding? How can you explore that with curiosity? how do you make sure that you're making connections and bridging connections? How do we then personalize what we're doing? Because we're not working with animals, we're working with humans, right? And everyone's experience and need changes daily based on something that happened to them and something that they're getting ready to go and do. Building opportunities for sameness. This is one of the main things that I learned in my years of working in intergenerational programmings, right? You're bringing together these people who are years and years apart. But how can I use music to bring the sameness? And my favorite example from this is when working with a group of fourth graders and older adults. And one of the things that I allowed to pop out one day is someone told me that it was someone's birthday. And I was like, oh, I got my guitar, let's sing it. So we ended up singing happy birthday to someone who was turning 9. And then older adults, not to be outdone, told me that it was someone else's birthday. And we ended up singing to this woman who was turning 90. And through those birthday connections, it was so just, it was a sweet moment because the 9-year-old then asked her parents if she could invite her 90-year-old grandfriend over to the house to ride horses for her birthday. And in that moment, age was not a difference. It is that we enjoy things together. We enjoy music, being in music together. And now I want to share part of my other hobbies, right? When we are working with an older adult, it is so, 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 so important to honor their life. They've lived a lot of it, right? Learn about that. Learn about what are the things that make them them, right? And connecting them to community. One of my other favorite stories is working with the intergenerational rock band. It was my college students. So I took my music therapy students and it was their practicum for the semester. And so there is a space, and we did it for 2 semesters. So we do it for a whole academic year. And you're building interventions that foster connection, right? Because just because we put 2 generations next to each other, they're not going to interact, right? We got to build relationships. We have to foster that as the music practitioner. And one of the relationships that happened that I didn't know about until I saw it unfolding was one of my music therapy students was a double major. It was music therapy and composition. And her senior project was that she chose to write a musical. And she chose to write a musical about students in a music school in a coffee shop that they used to go to that was getting ready to close, and their ability to help this coffee shop stay alive. And she cast one of our older adult rock band members who was a retired priest, a retired Episcopalian priest, who always wanted to act and never had had a chance to. And he was so proud of that performance. His adult children drove in from out of state to see it. And he was good in it too. He had speaking roles, he had singing roles. And this beautiful thing that blossomed out of an intergenerational rock band because we just taught 2 generations how to be together and have sameness, right? So I have talked a lot at you. I have been so grateful that you are here sharing time with me today. I have some time for questions and points of resonation that I would love for you to put in the Q&A. But before I do that, I do want to switch to the next slide, which is to say we want you to join the MDRN network. We enjoy being in community with others who are wanting to enhance older adults' lives, and especially older adults with dementia, through using music, through exploring research. So here's the QR card. I'm going to leave it up on the screen for just a moment, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow spaces for questions and points of resonation, maybe how you've been using some of these things in your own community, or spaces that you can see yourself using them in your own community. And thank you so much for being with me. Okay, so I've got some things in the question and answer. Thank you so much to the anonymous attendee, that one of the best webinars you've participated in a very long time. And thank you for that. Can I repeat the 3 sources that I mentioned earlier in my presentation? Yes, it was Designed for Belonging. And that book is by Susie Wise in the Stanford D School. I'm just going to hold it up a little bit so that you can see it. The other was the Social Identity Wheel by University of Michigan. And then the third one was the music, no, it wasn't music, it was the Social Ecosystem Map by Deepa Iyer. And you also can reach out to me via email and I can send the links to the sources for anyone. I'm going to work on putting that in. I'm going to answer it right here on Lisa's comments. Please feel free to send me an email for anything. Okay, next comment is from Brianna. I'm a music therapist and I'm about to teach a class to my residents at a senior living facility about expressive music making and recording. Do you have any recommendations as to how I can ensure residents who don't have a music background can feel like they belong as much as others who do have experience? Oh, I love that. One of the things that I like to do is I like to lead with a lot of personal stories, not over sharing, right? We still have our boundaries, but the space where I invite people to think to, let me back up. I like to share with people how my own music exploration works, right? How I get into music. And sometimes it's teaching someone how to be in the music making experience with you, how to discover what they like and what they don't like. It's giving them the tools. I remember when I first started using recordings and music on our phones in my intergenerational rock bands. And I was getting ready to teach them technology. And there were people who were like, I don't want to be in this technology space with you. Why can't you give me a CD? And when I made an actual handout on how to teach them, right, and then walked it through with them, and then see the moments of excitement because they are learning something with me, right? So I think try to break it down a little bit even more, like how to bring everyone into a space of accessing what you're about to teach them about. I hope that answers the question. And if you want more clarification, you could feel free to put something else in the question and answer and or reach out to me via email. Okay, Rebecca, so grateful to you for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you. Any advice for recruiting for intergenerational groups? We are having trouble getting young families to come out to one of our senior living sites. Yes. So, one of the things that I love to do is drive around to find out where the places are next to each other. Um, and for the preschool program, I actually had to take the older adults to the preschool. The preschoolers were not allowed to leave their campus. And so I was not working at that senior facility, but I was able to work with the lifestyle director that the bus could be used at a certain time of day, certain times of week to have the older adults go to the preschool. And so I did that. And so I used to actually show up to the older adult facility 30 minutes before we were going to the preschool. We do some pre work together. I teach them what we're getting ready to do. And then we would go to the older adult facility on the bus. We would have our experience and then the bus would come back. And the thing that was really, really cool about it is that when the preschoolers were out on the parking on their playground throughout the day, whenever they would see that bus drive by just for normal days, they would think it was their grandfriends on the bus and be like waving, "Hey, grandfriends." Right. So even just like training young people how to see. The other thing is I worked with sometimes the music teachers at the elementary schools that I was working with because they would let me use their music hour sometimes because we were doing things that were heavily related to the music that they were doing in the school. And so then those fourth graders would walk over to our older adult facility where we were doing, right? So it's just kind of really researching and connecting even more. What are the organizations that are close by that would be willing? And how can you leverage the resources that you have? That's kind of my first thought, Rebecca. And then we have something from Cindy. This was so good, Melita. These are all points that I often share as frustrations of what is missing in senior living communities. Yes, The sense of belonging is what I base most of my practice on as well and try to teach other staff members. That's exactly it, Cindy. And that's what I mean about that advocacy piece, right? So much of our day is not just running around doing our music interventions, it is teaching how to be in community with older adults, to see them as co-contributors, co-collaborators, co-people that we build with so that all of their day has a beautiful quality of life, from the food that they're eating, from the food that they have access to the things that happen in the day. So thank you for sharing that, Cindy. I really, really love that. We have time if there's anything else that pops up in the question and answer. We'll leave it open for another moment or so. And then again, just remember to please, please join the network. We want to get to know you all as well. And we look forward to going through another year with the network. Be on the lookout from our social media pages, our LinkedIn pages, our emails. Go join the network. We're doing another round of pilot funding for grants. If you're wanting to partner with others to do research, we enjoy and invite you to be part of the network. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.